What's up guys, it's BlizzkinBoy here, and I've been thinking about Silent Hill, specifically how one of my biggest critiques of the entire franchise is how dull the combat is. I'm either just repeatedly shooting something until it dies, occasionally getting stun locked by it when it fights back, or hitting it with something sharp or blunt and plays out the same thing as shooting except I'm closer, or I'm just kicking it while it's down. And I made videos in the past critiquing it, trying to talk about how to improve it, but I think I really figured out the way to improve Silent Hill's combat. I'm not going to talk about its map design or anything like that, specifically the combat. And I think the key to fixing Silent Hill's combat is by porting over a lot of the controls and mechanics from The Last of Us. Now you might be thinking, Bliskin, what the fuck are you talking about? The Last of Us is a third-person shooter slash, stealth game that's very of its time with the PS3. And yes, however, if there's one thing The Last of Us and Silent Hill have in common, is that it focuses on simplistic inputs and brutal, grueling animations that bring you into it. So for example, let's take Silent Hill. It's a survival horror game, I have a limited set of ammo, and I'm shooting something and seeing it react to getting shot until it eventually goes down. Sometimes it gets into a weakened state, and then I need to put down the finishing touch. There's nothing mechanically complex about it except how much ammunition I have or how much health the enemy or I have. Now in The Last of Us, it's kind of the same thing. Ammo is scarce, and when I come into combat, I'm either hitting an enemy or I'm shooting an enemy until they drop dead. I'm not thinking about dodging, I'm not thinking about parries, I'm not thinking about anything crazy like that. And sometimes when the enemy's health is low enough, it's in a state where I need to finish it off. So there's a lot of similarities between Silent Hill and The Last of Us in regards to the combat. But now let me walk you through some situations or certain mechanics in The Last of Us that I think would be a perfect fit for Silent Hill.
Forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
For the most part, I want to focus on one of my favorite set pieces in The Last of Us. Now there's this section towards the beginning of the winter chapter in which you are playing as Ellie. Ellie is very different from Joel, whereas Joel can take hits and deliver punishing damage to unstunned enemies, Ellie cannot. She either needs to get the drop on her enemy, use a bullet or a throwable to stun the enemy before taking them down, and really needs to be conscious of spacing between her and the enemies, because even the most basic of enemies can take Ellie down in a single shot. So there's this element of tension when you're playing. Specifically, I want to talk about the part where you and David are fighting off infected in the abandoned factory, warehouse, wherever this is. Now, you'll notice when I'm playing here that I'm constantly running around, specifically running backwards, trying to keep the enemy in view and keep in mind my distance from them. I have frantic reloads going on. I'm using really slow weapons like the bow and arrow and the hunting rifle, both of which I would feel are very applicable to Silent Hill. I mean, Silent Hill 2, the strongest weapon is the slow and clunky hunting rifle, and it pretty much functions the exact same way here in Last of Us. The only thing is I'm over-the-shoulder third-person shootering instead of just, having that awkward lock-on that sometimes works if you're in a room or space where the camera is designed for it, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about camera systems. What I want to focus on is how this rifle here functions in a very similar way to the rifle that James would be using, or the shotgun that Heather would be using. It's slow and it's powerful. It can put my enemies down, however, I need to be at a distance in which this is applicable. I need to have the ammunition loaded and ready. If I get caught during a reload, I'm dead. If I get too close while trying to aim, I'm dead. So I have this slow, clunky weapon that doesn't have a lot of ammunition and takes forever to reload, with not a lot of ammunition in it, yet I have to aim fast at these enemies that are going to be sprinting at me and can claw me apart in brutal ways. On the other side, if I don't have any ammunition in my bow or inside of my rifle, I can pick up bricks or bottles. Now with these bricks or bottles, I can throw them at the enemy, which will put them in a stun state. This allows Ellie to go up to the enemy and finish them off with a brutal stab. I can also go into stealth and get behind these enemies and stab them to death that way. I can even utilize my AI companion while they're putting the enemy into a stun state through a punch. I can go up to them and stab them then. So there are a lot of opportunities in which I can turn the tide in my favor, using the AI, using weapons, using stealth, or using throwables. Since the future of Silent Hill is very clearly going in the third-person perspective, I think this kind of thinking would be applicable here. Now, I'm not saying we need to have Heather going around throwing bricks to distract enemies while she sneaks by them. However, having this system where Heather needs to throw something at an enemy, or time her hit with a melee weapon, or utilize, ammunition from a weapon but need to be a certain distance, or need to run away or back away while an enemy is coming at her, would be much more interesting than the basic button mashing slog that is the combat. And it really doesn't take a lot to make even, beating this horse or shooting one of the monsters coming at Heather to make it more interesting. Another thing that Last of Us does, which we already saw with Ellie's section, but we can also see when playing as Joel, is that utilizing clever camera movements and snappy animations, the act of pressing square, 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 square to kill an enemy can become engaging if we're brought into the brutality of the animation. So think about it, whether you're playing as Heather, James, Harry, whoever, when you're fighting a lot of enemies with a melee object, you're just beating them to death. Now in Last of Us, when you are beating something to death, it is so intimate and it is so brutal that you kind of feel appalled by it. Whether an enemy is begging for their life, or you're seeing Joel mash an infected skull right open, popping it all over. The gore, the way the movement tracks the actual impact of the hit, takes an act which is just me pressing a single button and makes it feel so much more intense, so much more. So again, let's picture Heather for a second here beating one of the enemies to death. Instead of just a static camera from up above, as Heather lazily swings a weapon, we instead get locked right behind Heather with a clear view of the enemy we're striking, the monstrosity that Masahiro Ito has concocted for us, and we're following through the camera the motions of the maul or the katana or the 4x4 plywood as it collides into this monster's flesh over and over again, seeing the impact, the bruising, the fleshy chunks that fly off as this thing is mercilessly beaten to the ground. And then when it's on the ground, instead of just a static kick as we're looking over it, maybe a much stronger stomp or a final swing of our weapon to put it down. The same thing could be when we're shooting. When Heather is bringing up her shotgun to fire upon an enemy, let's see the chunks fly off of them. Let's have them be put down into a weakened state where we can decide to go for a melee kill, which again would use those clever camera techniques to show the brutality of that, or even a finishing shot to the enemy being a lot closer and intimate. So we don't need crafting mechanics, we don't need, too much stealth mechanics, although I feel being able to get the drop on some of these monsters and some stealth and hiding, maybe turning off the flashlight and the radio, putting yourself at a little bit of a disadvantage, but also being able to sneak up on certain enemies would be pretty cool. And I mean, crafting mechanics are already kind of in Silent Hill when you're putting together different puzzle items to get through the area. However, the point is, we don't need the backpack, we don't need the excess of weapons, we don't need it to be The Last of Us. However, specifically the combat system. We can still have our hallways, we can still have our locked doors, we can still have our dark rooms, we could still have the focus being on horror. But we can take this one really weak aspect of the series and either bring tension through weakness or horror through the acts we are directly committing on these enemies. So, in that way, I believe The Last of Us and the way it handles combat could be used to fix Silent Hill. But I guess we're gonna have to wait to see how it plays out in the Silent Hill 2 remake and Silent Hill F. It's definitely gonna be an interesting ride whenever these games come out. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think about Last of Us's combat system. Let me know what you think about Silent Hill's combat system. I remember I got a lot of flack for critiquing Silent Hill 3. I'm very brutal on this franchise, but I really like it, and I would like to see it improve. So anyways, I've been Pliskin. Over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.
Greetings!